Windows and doors might be the most important design feature on your building. Not only are they going to change what you see from your building, but also how your building functions, how it feels, and their installation can cause major failure problems in your building if done wrong or if done without thought of how the whole thing's going to function. In addition, windows put in the wrong spot might cause you to be way too inefficient with your building, or may cause you to not quite have the views you had expected when you originally designed the building. So some things you want to know are: where do you live? What is your longitude and latitude and your temperate climate? What kind of person are you? Are you a morning sun person who really needs an east window and potentially a north view as soon as you get up to drink your coffee? How windy is it? What are your concerns there? And also, what's the angle of sun at which you're going to be building? In addition, what are the designs of your actual building? Do you need to push your windows out because you're going to have exterior insulation and need to do some finish details there? What does it look like when the windows are trimmed inside and out? I think one of the hardest things for me to understand is exactly how sun functions in the building through the windows. So this is where an architect or design program can really help you out. For instance, in our house, we ended up putting our house 15 degrees off of true south. If we lived on the equator, this would be a pretty easy calculation as to how the sun would affect us. But the farther away from the equator we get, the more the winter and summer sun is going to change how our building functions. In the winter, the sun travels at a super low arc, coming up very low in the southeast and sets pretty early in the southwest. In the summer, the sun actually comes up in the northeast and then sets in the northwest for us. What this means for our windows, this house was actually designed to be truly turned 180 degrees and facing south, is now our east bedroom window gets great winter sun, and then the south windows get good winter sun. But then in the summer, we get glancing sun for too long in that east bedroom window. Our length of our eaves blocks most of the sun through our south windows, which is great. But then right as the sun sets, we get sun in that west side. The length of our eaves, the end of our rafters, is really important to how we block summer sun through those south windows. And that's where an architect and building programs really help you calculate that distance. So looking at how that affects the front or the big bow of our building that was designed to be facing south, the spring and the fall, the winter sun arc going at that 45 degrees from southeast to southwest gives us nice light through some of our east windows, and then some nice south light through the dead of winter. But then in the summer, when that sun starts coming in from the northeast and setting in the northwest, because we have this big bow with eaves that are way too short and way too far away, we end up getting a whole lot of sun in our northeast and our west windows, and heats up our house more than we would have expected if we had taken the time to think about our design a little more thoroughly when we changed the location of our building. A note here in framing: if you get to a point where you realize you've placed a window that won't take advantage of your view or isn't quite what you want, this is why you've put things together in screws, or where you should pause, step back, and reevaluate whether or not it's worth fixing it at this point. We completely rebuilt the entire south loft wall for this reason. So your actual window opening. The window opening that you're going to be working with is called a rough opening. And the rough opening is, if you buy new windows, is usually specified exactly the distance you should leave in your framing. So if you're buying new windows, find that out before you start framing your walls. Also, another note, if you have a building inspector and a building department, remember, find out all those details. The minimum rough opening I like to leave on any window is 1/4 inch on all sides. So that means that my rough opening is going to be 1/2 inch bigger than my actual measurements of my window. It's usually better to actually leave 3/4 of an inch to an inch bigger than your actual window, just to give yourself room in case your window opening in your wall ends up not being plumb or level, which is actually very common. And you really don't want to squeeze your window openings too tight, because if your building shifts or settles, which most buildings do, it can pinch your window. And this is especially a problem if you have an opening window. This is a reason some buildings have windows that no longer open, is there wasn't enough space left. And people did not install their windows with shims and spray foam in order to give expansion room for wood, which even if it doesn't shift overall a lot, wood swells and contracts with different temperatures and different weather. So you want to make sure to leave that room in your rough opening. There are lots of different ways to flash a window. I'm just showing one. So here we have our house wrap, and I'm going ahead and I'm cutting it out on the bottom and both sides, and I'm cutting it back. You can actually leave flaps that you staple around on the inside for this bottom and both sides. I've also cut 45s, about 6 inches up from the top of the window. You can't really see it in this video, but there's two 45s up there. That little flap of Tyvek I will actually staple up out of the way, which I'm going to go do right now, so that I can attach that later after my window is installed. The next thing I'm going to do is check to see how my windowsill is sitting. I generally try and actually frame my windowsills so that the sill plate is beveled just a little bit down, so that if water gets in the window area, it will actually drain out of the building rather than draining back into the building. And so that's something I've done in framing. If it's level, that's fine. If it's draining back towards the building, I might consider adding something like a piece of beveled cedar siding to create a shim plate that makes sure my building will actually drain water back towards the outside rather than back to the inside where it'll ruin my wall. Now I'm going to go ahead and start flashing my window. I'm using zip tape. I love zip tape for window flashing. It is amazing. So the principles of window flashing are you always flash from the bottom up. If you just remember bottom up, it will really make flashing things easier. This is the same for siding. This is the same for anything, because you want everything from the top to drain over the layer below it. My bottom piece of window flashing is composed of two pieces. The first piece overlaps the outside of my window by a couple inches and is split about halfway between the outside of the wall and the inside of my windowsill. So I'm going to go ahead and cut 45s in the corners of this zip tape so that I can press the zip tape down into the windowsill area. I'm then going to roll my tape with either a roller or anything hard and smooth, because zip tape says right on it, roll the tape, and they mean it. Get all those air bubbles out. I'm then putting the second piece of my zip tape in, the second part of my windowsill flashing. And this one's going to go on the inside of my windowsill. This is sort of forming the base where my window's going to sit on, but it's going to overlap the outside of my window by ideally at least an inch. And again, I'm going to cut corners into that. It's going to go a couple inches up either side of the window, and then I'll cut 45s in that tape on the outside, press it down firmly, and I will then roll all of that tape to try and get all the air bubbles out of that space. So remember, I'm flashing from the bottom up. I put my lowest piece of tape on first, then I put my windowsill on, and then I'm going to move on to my sides of my tape. Really make sure those corners are nice and well sealed. For the sides of my tape, I'm going to try and overlap it 1/3 of my zip tape on the inside and outside, or half and half. It's sticky stuff, so it can be hard to get this exactly how you want it, and you don't want to pull it up too many times. So I usually start my zip tape at the top, and then I roll it down past the bottom flashing. Roll all the air bubbles out and repeat this on the other side and then on the top of the window. Be sure that piece of house wrap is out of your way when you do the top of the window and will be stapled up and ready to put down when you install the window later. Now it's time to test the rough fit of your window. Don't install your windows permanently until you've actually tested the rough fit, because we're going to be adding silicone to this window, and we don't want to add the silicone and then discover it doesn't fit quite right and have to take it in and out. So I'm going ahead and putting a level on this to see how level my window is. This is where I start adding shims on either side, depending on which end of my window I need to lift up or put down. Also, remember, you're working with glass, so this is where lots of things go wrong. Now that I like the fit and know it has enough room, I'm going to go ahead and add silicone to this window. You can either add it to the window flange, or you can add it to the framing here. So in the framing, I'm adding it to the inside of the bottom sill, and to the outside of the sides and the top. Do not add it to the outside of the bottom of the window. You need that part to stay open, so if water gets in, it can drain out. So I have it on the actual windowsill on the inside, both sides, and then the top. And then I'm going to pick my window, because this is such a small window, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to carefully place it. Hopefully I've put my silicone in the right spot. And then Margot's helping me hold while we go ahead and check level and the sides. And then I'm gonna end up going to the inside to add shims and try and get this window all set. Shims are just beveled pieces of material. They're made out of wood or plastic or composite. And I like 1/4 inch shims. They go from a 1/4 inch at the fat end and they taper down to nearly nothing at the far end. So you can put them in either just singularly and then they have score marks and they break off, or you can stack them one skinny one to one fat one to create more space. So once we know we're level, and then we go ahead and put some tack screws in there so poor Margot doesn't have to hold the window until the cows come home. The next thing you want to do is make sure to check, hopefully you locked your window if it's an opening window while you were installing it, because that keeps it square to the best of your ability. Now really double check and make sure everything is functioning like it should. Check the lock, open and close it, make sure it's closing right, because now's the time to unscrew things, change your shims on the sides and the bottom, and make sure your window is operating correctly. After you're sure you like the fit and the function of your window, then you're going to go ahead and attach all the rest of the screws. Make sure to do a pretty aggressive screwing job if it's a big window and is going to get a lot of pressure on it. If you're on a little bit of smaller window, you have less concern of how many screws you put in, but most windows will actually have installation instructions in their materials that they send with their windows. One piece I forgot to remind you of when you're installing your window before you put all the screws in, check your diagonals. Make sure, this is especially important on doors, make sure your diagonals are equal. And I know that can be hard on some of the trim pieces. Once you're content with your window, then you're going to start the flashing process. Remember, we flash from the top down, but in this case, we are going to leave the bottom flashing open. Because if water gets behind our window, we have to have somewhere for it to get out. Otherwise, we trap it behind the window and we soak our wood and rot our wall. So start with your sides and go ahead and attach it, cut it off below the bottom of the window, and then roll it flat. Do both sides and then do your top. Once your sides and top are flashed, you're gonna pull that top piece of house wrap down, the one that you stapled up out of the way, and put it over the top piece of window flashing, in this case my zip tape. And I'm actually going to zip tape those corners just to make sure the wind doesn't catch it and rip it until I have siding on here. So now when water comes down my house wrap, it can go down my house wrap and outside my window. The last piece I like to install is a rain screen. This is because we get a lot of high wind driven rain or snow, and so I don't want moisture to slip under my siding and into my window space. So I'm using just a little scrap of house wrap that I'm gonna put over the bottom of the window and attach with staples and a little bit of zip tape at the corners to keep it put in place. You're going to want to make sure this doesn't rattle ultimately, because it's going to be under your siding and you don't want to hear it. But the purpose of it is to prevent water from driving under, but also to let water out if it gets into your window space. At this stage, get really excited because your building is well on its way to being dried in and secure for you. So give yourself a pat on the back. Doors are the same principle as windows, except they're heavier, harder to install, and it's more important that you double check your diagonals and you really get it square and plumb, because it'll change the operation of your door. Also considering adding some sort of plastic commercial sill member underneath that drains when water comes down that door and tries to slip underneath and drain into your building.